And so now we bring it home to our final third of three panels. We have three women who are Olympians in their field and one actual Olympian who will be part of this panel. So moderating our panel is my good friend Amira Rose Davis, who's assistant professor in the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies at the University of Texas, my old home in Austin, where she specializes in 20th century American history with an emphasis on race, gender, sports, and politics. Amira was named a Mellon Emerging Faculty Leader by the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, and she is now finishing up her first book, Can't Eat a Medal, The Lives and Labors of Black Women Athletes in the Age of Jim Crow, and she's the co-host of the Burn It All Down Feminist Sports Podcast. So Amira, thank you for joining us. We also have my friend, Dr. Courtney Cox, Assistant Professor in Department of Indigenous Race and Ethnic Studies at the University of Oregon. Her research examines issues related to identity, technology, and labor through sport and wine. Her current book, Double Crossover, Gender Politics and Performance in Basketball, considers how Black women and non-binary athletes maneuver through the global sports media complex. Good to see you, Dr. Cox. And then a new friend of mine, Dr. Samantha Sheppard, Assistant Professor of Cinema and Media at Cornell University, where my aunt used to be a professor. Dr. Sheppard's research interests include African-American representation in cinema, television studies, sports films, feminist media studies, embodiment studies, and critical race theory. She writes extensively on issues of race, gender, and representation in film, TV, and digital media. She teaches courses on global cinema, sports films, contemporary television, African-American film history, pop culture, women filmmakers, and Blackness on screen. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Sheppard. And finally, our Olympian, Anna Cockrell, track and field athlete competing in sprinting and hurdling. She's a two-time medalist at the 2019 Pan Am Games in Lima, Peru, represented the United States at the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo, and has been an outspoken advocate for the mental health of Black women, including athletes. Really looking forward to this panel. Four of you, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And Amira, I will turn it over to you to moderate this panel. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and thank you all for joining us today. We're all happy to be batting cleanup and hoping to have a really great discussion. So I think one of the beautiful things about having a panel centered on Black womanhood in sports is that we get to center Black women. But I think it also sometimes runs the risk of being siloed, and it becomes like the little blue box in a textbook where it's like, this is what Black women are doing over here. And the truth is that Black women athletes can speak to multiple themes that we've already heard today, as well as others that we want to put on the table. So we're going to kind of flip it a little bit. Instead of talking about themes and just thinking about how they impact Black women athletes, we're going to center the experiences of Black women athletes, of course, led by our Olympian, Anna Cockrell. And then we're going to think about how those themes and those experiences of Black women in sports tell us larger kind of narratives or things to consider about themes about race and sports and society writ large. So that's what we got going on today. And yeah, I think we'll dive right in. So of course, Dr. Sheppard, Dr. Cox, and I study sports, but I really want to start with you, Anna. We've had the pleasure of sharing panel space since you were at USC, both you and Courtney repping that alma mater. And we watched you as a collegiate athlete navigate a very particular moment, engage in athletic activism, engage in rights for college athletes. And then we watch you with this platform transform into Olympian before our eyes. And of course, you were going to the 2020 Olympics held in 2021, which became like the summer of Black women. Every other day, it seemed like there was a story centering a Black woman in sports, whether it was about the ban on swim caps or Namibian distance runners being banned because of testosterone, whether it was Sha'Carri, whether it was no shortage, Simone, right? No shortage of narratives that summer. And now here we are, gearing up for another Olympic year, and you're still on the track. And so I just wanted to start with you to just, especially in an effort to center athlete voices in these discussions, to think about what it means for you to navigate athletic activism in your platform and this kind of world of professional sports as a Black woman.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Olympics was technically my first meet as a professional. I had been in college for 5 years, and then you run your last race in your uniform, and overnight you've gone from a collegiate athlete to a professional. So I'd done international competition before, but I went to the Olympics. I had not signed a contract with a sponsor yet. And I'm living my dream / trying to achieve the next dream, which is getting an Olympic medal. 2, I know that the better I do, the more lucrative of a contract I'll be able to negotiate. And 3, it's like the world is falling apart all around us, and we are also trying to perform with the highest stakes possible. So the Olympics in 2021, when I look back on it, I feel it was only 2 years ago, but I feel like it was just a much, much younger version of myself that was so overwhelmed because we were trying to do so much. We knew what was going on with Simone Biles. We knew what was going on with the ban on swim caps, and you're paying attention to it, but you're also like, wait, I got my first round in 2 days. Did practice go how I wanted it to go? And then I think, Amira, I don't know if you remember, I texted you because a lot of us were talking about a potential protest during the games. And so now for me in that moment, I was like, I'm in these meetings, I'm in this massive Teamworks group chat where we're talking about, are we going to protest? What is it going to look like? Is it a podium protest? Is it a protest when you're doing your field event intros? Is it a protest when you're on the track? How are we going to do any of this? And I'm like, I'm so nervous. I don't know if I'm going to make it to the line. So it was just a whirlwind of an experience. And I think the main thing that I gained from that was the ability to, in the center of chaos, find my calm. I was not able to do that in 2021. I was very overstimulated, very overwhelmed. And so the last 2 years, really, in the beginning of my professional career, going into my 3rd year as a pro, has been, how do I find stillness in the midst of chaos? How do I narrow my focus? Because I think in college, I was involved in so many different things. I was doing student athlete activism from the perspective of racial equity and trying to have USC become a more representative athletic department. We had very few Black coaches, very few Black athletic trainers, no Black people on staff in our sports psychology department. So I'm fighting for that. I was involved in a lot of the conversations about Pac-12 potential unionization. The football players were really adamant about trying to get paid, COVID safety issues. And I was a captain of the team, and I was working on my master's. And so I was pulled in so many different directions, and I was doing so many things and speaking so much that I didn't have enough left for myself. And so I got to the Olympics, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I am overwhelmed. And so now I'm in this space where I'm listening more, I'm learning more. I still believe in being a leader, and I'm still involved in a lot of the activism spaces from USC, but more in an advisory role where I'm not a student athlete anymore. And the field, the landscape of collegiate athletics has changed significantly. I mean, I finished in 2021 and I didn't have name, image, and likeness rights. So I wasn't negotiating those deals the same way the student athletes are now. So in a way, it's not really right for my voice to be the one that everyone hears on these things. But what I do now is I talk to a lot of the women from USC who are now leading the United Black Student Athletes Association that I helped co-found. And they're asking me, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? What would you do differently? What do you think we should be focusing on? And I just tell them all the time, you know, the goal was for this to be ongoing. So by being here, by participating in it, you've already achieved all the dreams we had for y'all. And now it as much as it was my vision and the other co-founders, it's yours to do with what you will. So what can I do for you? There's some of the student athletes who have Nike name, image, and likeness deals. I'm a Nike athlete now, so I can kind of talk to them about some of what that's like. But it's just been a really full circle experience as an athlete where I was so on the forefront and the one speaking and the one leading. And now because I've gained so much experience, I'm listening more and I'm advising more and I'm doing more from the sidelines while I learn more, because I think the privilege of getting older and wiser is you start to see how much you don't know. And instead of that being embarrassing, it becomes a challenge. I don't know these things, but I have the opportunity to learn. So in addition to running and doing all these other things I'm trying to do, I'm trying as hard as I possibly can to continue to listen and to continue to learn. And hopefully that answered the
Yes,
question.
I love that. I think it's great and it sets us up really great. And we're going to get right back to NIL in a second. But first, I want to turn to Dr. Cox and Dr. Sheppard because you're our media experts. And one of the things that Anna brought up seems to be part of the narrative in the story about Black women athletes. Two things that are always present. One, abundance of narratives about them, symbolic uses of Black women in sports, whether it's hashtag Black Girl Magic or, they're the superheroes or all the things on that side, or they're like very disposable, right? And the other thing that you brought up is it seems like, and we know that the story and the history of women in sports is always sports are inherently political, but we know that there's not even like a pretend in women's sports because you have to fight to even take the field, right? And so all of the things that you mentioned juggling in, I think, is very typical of what we see when we are in conversation with Black women athletes, which is like, oh, here's all of the things that you're doing at the same time. And part of it is not even like a choice of like, do I speak up or do I not? Because if you don't make a way, there's no way there. And so I'm wondering, Sam, Courtney, if you want to speak to the narratives that we see woven around Black women in sports that you think are very kind of stirring and prevalent, or touch on any of the points raised by Anna about the juggling act that is required to succeed professionally as a Black woman in sports.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be in community with y'all. This is so exciting for me for many reasons. And I think part of the thing is we can talk, I think, academically about activism, but what we hear when we actually listen to athletes and center their voice is like, they're also asked to be the very best in the world while they're doing it, right? So you want people that both like have the time to read all these things and compress and understand all this information, but then go out and be the best on the biggest stage of your life that you're doing around the world constantly. And so I think there's something grounding about the things we talk about conceptually versus what is actually happening. And I'm working in that in my own work of like always trying to center athlete voice, because if you actually follow an athlete around for 24 hours, if you just follow them, not even doing exactly what they're doing, just watching them from the time they're waking up very early to go into bed at night, all the calls, all the media, the socials, like all the stuff they have to do, and they have to lift, and they have to go out and practice, and they have to take all these calls, and they want to have a partner and have a family. And it's like part of it is like, just being able to talk to your mom. Like, I mean, that me following athletes is like just them being able to touch base with their partner or their mom, or like have a moment to yourself where you can just breathe for a second. I think I've learned so much in that. And so when we ask athletes to do things that many of us aren't even doing in our own lives, right? We want them to speak up and have all this knowledge when they speak up and do it perfectly, but also win a gold medal. We're asking for so much. And that's where the superhero and Black Girl Magic and all these unfair kind of ways that we heap this on, these things that can be celebratory, but they're always asking for more labor, right? And the second that you fail, right, Sha'Carri, like the second that you aren't at the best, when you don't feel your best, when you need to take a day off, that's when it's a problem, because there's a narrative that needs to happen. For us to accept you, you have to hit all the marks. You have to look really good while you're doing it, or we're going to talk about you. You have to be in perfect mental and physical health at all times. Like, it's like you have to do it, you have to make it look easy, and you have to do it in a way that is politically savvy, right? For your career, for your endorsement, so that you can continue to do the thing you love. And so I think about that unfairness a lot, right? I don't know what to do with that, right? Life is unfair. But I think there's something about acknowledging, rather than like, what did this athlete do during this moment? Were they activists enough? Did they do enough, right? Rather than what I love about the work that I've been doing within basketball is the way it's a collective. If we do things together, it's not the weight of one person, one voice, one singular narrative, which history loves. I'm talking to a historian, right? And so it's like the ways that I've seen on the women's basketball side, the active evading of the singular narrative there's breathing space that I see and I'm learning from in my own work of like, oh, they're actually giving us a model of how we can also support each other. And so what I've learned a lot, and I know that there's other ways folks are doing, but I'm just in my world, when I'm thinking about women's sports and women's basketball globally, I see a way that there's care, and care is happening as they're also doing the work of being an athlete around the world, of being an activist. And so that care and the way that they have this love and kind of solidarity with each other, I think is something that I think any kind of organizing movement can learn from Black women that are doing activist work, as well as being at the top of their game in sport.
That was such a rich rejoinder to Anna's really beautiful setup of the conversation here. And I want to thank you all for being here, and thank Amira for moderating what will hopefully be the closer of all closers with this panel. So, I come at sports from a few different angles, and hearing some of the threads here, I want to bring up a couple of critical concerns that we might think about, because in one of the things that you posit, Amira, is that bind between this kind of hyper visibility and this extreme erasure. So, and it's also singular, to Courtney's point, because it becomes so individualized because of all of those obstacles and hurdles you described about perfection, that there is only one. And then when that one is even, falters, then we don't know who's going to take that space for a vacuumous time. You can use Simone Biles as the example, what happens in 2021, hyper present, but then also when she asserts her own agency and her own health, there is this media recrimination of her, to the point that she has, in sports film fashion, a third act plot twist, come back. What do you call it? To again recontrol the narrative through, again, her own embodied and performative perfection. Still the best and doing the best. And I really wanted to sort of touch on a few things. Number one is that because I work on, in film and media and cultural industries, I'm often thinking about really sort of the sort of dominant narrative of Black women, and the ways in which it's not allowed to be aged. And by that, what I mean is that, particularly something that came from the other panel and some of the references that were being made to other, longstanding athletes and, sort of histories, is that Black women are denied histories, despite them having them. So each one pops up singular, ahistorical, and within our cultural imaginary also functions that way. And so it's really, really heartening to see the ways in which Black women, like the organization that Anna helped, found, and just to keep something in perpetuity, just to keep something moving, is also like a huge win. People really don't get that, because once you have to outgrow you, and that's already a feat. But also like the Black Women's Player Collective, that particularly focuses on Black women and or has a lot of attention to Black women in sport and soccer, with Lynn Williams. Needing to kind of create these kinds of institutions to add for a little bit more historicity, because all of the hyper visible Black women stars are students, are young, are, as we might affectionately call them at times, kids. And so the thing that they're grappling with and having to grapple with, we don't have a cultural imaginary that says, oh, beyond like are extreme heroes who have become deified. Oh, you must be like a Flo. You must be like the Althea. Like you got to be like the most perfect person within our sort of cultural imaginary. And so that's where it gets into this hypervisibility, but also this sort of erasure of historical narratives. And I think one of the things that are vexing for Black women athletes, particularly, is the ways in which they have to stand as these intertextual stars and celebrities. And I don't think we do enough to think about that, because the sport obviously matters. Like the game matters, but so much happens from, the starting gun to the finish line. But like the game is also everything else that Anna talked about. Like I've got to perform, I've got to get the deals, I've got to look a certain way, I've got to make sure, I've met the right people, I put myself in the right situations, and so I could have this entire career built up. And so the ways in which they have to become these kind of mediated stars, and the ways in which those often include very fraught narratives in this hyper-saturated mediated world, the fact that they have to continue to narrativize themselves. I mean, it's a lot to ask an athlete to say, you have to be a version of you on social media for a public and a fan base, also because you want to get those NIL deals that allow you to sell yourself and sell your sport. And you also recognize that you have a temporal fix, because the reality is you put all 4 Black women on a panel, and we could have been filtered throughout the entire thing. It already says we have a liminality for which scholars, critics, and the public pretends there is no appetite for you. So you're so aware of the liminal ways in which you have to work. And I think that kind of mix of the sports star and the sports celebrity is one that is deeply intertwined in ways that we haven't begun to unpack because when we look at those who've had to move away from celebrity, and shout out to Amira Rose Davis and her wonderful work on Black gymnasts, but particularly I just saw a TikTok with Gabby Douglas, and she was, I was like, oh, she slowly keeps wanting to come back out, and she was doing a little challenge, I don't know, I don't got no upper body strength, so you can imagine. And it was just like, oh, because when she was a sporting star and a sporting celebrity, the world consumed her. And so it's really interesting to see this kind of particular moment for athletes. And I'll end right there.
Absolutely. Thank you all for those opening answers. I think one of the things that you really laid on the table is the example of what we're trying to achieve. What happens if you center Black women in histories of athletic activism is not just adding them to the story, but perhaps the narrative itself changes. Perhaps we start seeing collectively. The WNBA was strong in offering a blueprint in the model of this because they already had a strong union. They already had a strong union because they were fighting for to survive as a league. They were fighting for pay equity. And that doesn't mean that there's across the board agreements. If you watch Chiney Ogwumike's wonderful film 144, you can get a front row seat to the disagreements in the room, except the cohesion and the collectivity, not just inside the room, right, is what made the W stand apart. But the fact that then they said, hey, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to look at Black women activists who are on the ground getting out the vote. We're going to talk to Black women scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw, who can school us on what we don't know. And we're going to do this building horizontally and vertically, right, in order to advance our goals. That's a collective model of athletic activism. And I think that's also one that's grounded in history, going back to the mid-century. And so that comes into frame if we adjust our lens a little bit. So I think that's what we're going to try to do as we move through some of these themes. We've already put name, image, and likeness on the table, and I think that's a really great place to start. College sports is in a moment of shifting and realignment and fun, new imaginations and same old bullshit at the same time. I'm wondering, however, what we can glean from college sports and what we can understand about name, image, and likeness if we center Black women's experience under NIL. And to set this up, one of the things I want to note is that while this was being debated, one of the things that you see is Title IX invoked, right? So women are only thought about in these conversations about paying athletes as either a shield to say why we don't want to compensate athletes, or never really as a part of the discussion as if they had something to gain from also loosening restrictions on being able to make money off their name, image, and likeness. But I think another thing has happened as we've seen the last 2 years it take effect, which is that Black women are having a particular experience under NIL. And so we know Angel Reese is doing great. We know women's basketball is actually on a whole up there with football and with men's basketball in terms of NLI deals. But we also know that once we start disaggregating that, Black women are facing particular challenges in that marketplace. I want to throw it to you, Anna, to start with. What are you seeing now? You just narrowly missed this, but since you're doing advising work still on athletes' rights and at USC, what are you seeing about how Black women are navigating this new market in college athletics?
Yeah, I think, that anthology that's all the women are white, all the men are Black, but some of us are brave. I know y'all know it. If you don't know it, look it up. That's exactly how I feel so often as a Black woman in sports. Everyone is really cheering the rise of name, image, and likeness deals, and we're so excited about it. But the people who are getting held up with these big deals, all the women are white, all the men are Black, with very, very few exceptions for transcendent Black women who are absolute stars, who are having like an Angel Reese moment. And so what I've seen is the Black women that I know, and I'm sure there's exceptions, there's always exceptions, but the ones that I know are saying to me, I get offered deals, but they're not good ones. They are, basically, I'll give you an affiliate link. And if people use your code, you'll make a couple cents per sale. So hopefully you make some sales. If you do make some sales, maybe you'll get $1 collectively. And so it's this, they've gotten their rights back. But who is being valued? Who is being courted for deals? Who is being courted for deals that actually will make them money? And I think it becomes very labor intensive because you have to sell yourself and you have to be the right kind of Black woman. And then now we're getting into, okay, well, how are you presenting your hair? How are you dressing? Are you the right kind of femme? Are you the right kind of feminine? Are you the right shade? And so it becomes so many additional layers and so many ways that you're filtering yourself because you want to take advantage of the few deals that are available to you. And so I think it's hard. Being a student athlete is hard enough, going to class, going to practice, and then it's do you want to have an authentic voice or do you want to try to actually make money and get lucrative deals? And that is what very young people are navigating. I mean, I said I felt young 2 years ago at 23, 24. I can't imagine trying to do what they're doing at 18, 19, 20 years old. You're a content creator, you're a film editor, you're an audio editor, you're a student athlete, and now you have to think about how are people perceiving me, not just in the classroom, not just in real life, but how are people perceiving me on social media? And it's really a double-edged sword because I wish I would have had these rights when I was in college, but I could not have been making TikToks all the time and get ready with me. Like I frankly would not have had the capacity for that. And so I really worry about how do we support these women, these Black women who are trying to do this, who have their rights, but are already fighting an uphill battle. And my role in that has just been, I try to tell them what my story has been and say that I've done well. For some reason, not for some reason, but Nike keeps giving me the microphone and telling me to say what I want to say and to speak the truth. And it's worked out well for me. And yes, there is a way you can say it that will make it more acceptable, easier for them to swallow. But so far, I haven't had to compromise myself. And I just try to encourage them to do the same thing. And that hopefully the battles that I'm fighting, that the women before me fought, that the women before them fought, will continue to make a pathway where you don't have to filter yourself as much. You don't have to think so hard about being the right kind of Black woman. Hopefully, as we continue and as we progress in these name, image, and likeness deals, the next generation has better opportunities. But right now, there's not equity at all, I would say.
Absolutely. And I'll toss it to you in 1 second, but I think that one of the things that it reveals is that it's business as usual, right? It's using sports marketing logics that have not changed. And so it's prioritizing, it's the Sharapova effect, what we see, first of all, with who becomes deemed marketable. And especially there's a great study out of UMass Amherst, the Eisenberg School, Risa Sard and Nefertiti Walker. They did it over the last 2 years, looking at the fact that white women in basketball who presented femme, but even those who were gender nonconforming were understood to be more marketable than Black women who were anything other than femme, right? That still is huge disparities that we're seeing there. And I think about this because a long time when we talk about branding, we also talk about like the missed opportunities because we don't disrupt those market logics. So everybody who's ever watched like a Final Four game and said, somebody needs to be selling lashes because nothing has moved in 4 quarters, right? But that's not seen as a sports marketing brand, right? That's not seen as an inroad. So there's ways that we're just clinging to these old marketing logics and influencing cultures that we're seeing in a moment where everybody's saying everything is changing. And so I'm wondering, that's one of the ways that we can think about, well, what really is shifting here, especially as we watch schools invent names and titles and institutions to seize back control of regulating name, image, and likeness. My cousin played on the national winning women's basketball team with Angel, where there's huge disparities in terms of what they were able to own, but also didn't have a lot of control in terms of what deals that they were able to navigate because the school very quickly figured out that we can still be the middleman, which is, not exactly what we were going for with that. And so I want to throw this to Anna Cockrell. I know you have ideas about thinking about how people are branded, thinking about this at the collegiate standpoint, and also how it reflects a lot of what's going on at the professional level as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the University of Oregon, so you already know what's happening up here. You already know how a lot of bills get paid. We have this one booster, folks may have heard of him. He has a small company that Anna may know something about. But in any case, with that, Division Street is kind of has its own kind of reputation up here. When NIL was announced, and Oregon and California are two really important states in terms politically, in terms of how NIL happened. So even when we talk about NIL now, there's an amnesia about the fact that the NCAA fought this even as it was passing. That we actually had President Emmert was actually hitting up Oregon politicians and threatening them and saying, because Oregon wanted to take it further. They wanted to actually offer percentages of merchandise to athletes. And they were told by the NCAA, in their mind, they're like, you're buying something in the bookstore, you're buying it because you probably went to an event on campus and the athletes are actually driving it. They are the models. And so Oregon had a model, and Oregon has a certain politic and ethos as a state. So they're like, we don't want to just make sure they can make money on their own. We should also just pay them, right? And the NCAA was like, this will make everything crumble, which, in time may do so. But the idea was Mark Emmert called and said Oregon would not be eligible. Oregon athletes would not be eligible to compete because they are receiving different benefits than the rest of the NCAA's member institutions. And so they rolled it back. But even still, with all the states that passed, the NCAA in the last 11:59 p.m. was like, okay, this is all passing in these states. We'll just go ahead and make this happen. So just thinking about this relationship, the NCAA is already against this from the start. And then thinking about how member institutions are responding is really, really important. The ones that are either, I'm here at a place that wants to make a laboratory out of this, where they're like, well, we'll let business students practice marketing, right? It's not about, well, let's teach athletes what they can learn in terms of marketing their own. It was instantly like, well, the business school could do something with this, right? And so I'm thinking about that a lot of what about athletes that want to run their own businesses? What opportunities, if we are an institution of higher education, if we're about educating all of our students, why aren't we creating new, vibrant opportunities for students? I would love to see more athletes representing athletes that know that struggle, and I find that folks that have agents that were athletes, they have really fantastic experiences. Women athletes that are agents for other women athletes have these really dynamic experiences where they feel seen and heard in a different kind of way. They can say, oh, that felt like a weird meeting, right? And they can kind of understand the kind of nuances that are happening. And so from a collegiate perspective, all of these things are battles that have to be won. These aren't things that are given. And even within that, athletes are continuously having to fight to be seen, to be heard based on their own identities and how they intersect, right? And so I completely hear that of the ways that some people are just offered deals. They're like, here, you should have this deal. Here's, whatever. And other people are like, here's an affiliate link, now do the work and hype this and build all the content around it. And so there's a issue of labor, time intensity. I think I'm hearing with making a ton of, if you've ever tried to make a TikTok, you know how long these things, even a bad TikTok takes a long time, right? And then if you think about the idea of labor, value, and worth and how they're connected, and how that tells us a lot about how we still see Black women in a lot of spaces, the Sharapova effect, thinking about even when you're the best, who's the most marketable. And so I'm thinking about that a lot. And then I want to think about who we're marketing to, which I think, Amira, you kind of touched on, is that, from my brief time, I worked with a WNBA team for a season. And, it was interesting how much we're still really compelled to follow an 18 to 35-year-old white male fan, even though we have plenty of research, including the research you just cited, that tells us what people are into. People actually don't choose to go into a project or buy a product based on the attractiveness of the athlete. We know that no matter the gender of the athlete. And yet there's still this imperative. There's still something we're trying to sell. We know that there's ways that we're not marketing these sports. We're leaving a lot of money on the table. If we learned anything from the Kaplan report and everything that happened with the Final Four, there are millions of dollars that are just lost because of sexism, because they assume this value and worth is not entrenched in women's sports. And then specifically, as we get deeper into Black women's bodies, right? We're talking especially about basketball. And so there's already these market logics that we have active evidence, proof, science telling us otherwise. And yet people are still like, we want that fan. We want him, right? And that's not who's going to these games. That's not who's investing. That's not who's supporting. That's not who's following. And even just that shift in mindset changes everything. And then if we're also listening to the athletes who have voice, who are really intelligent, who have all these great ideas, there's all this synergy, there's all this possibility. And so when companies do it, we're like, oh yeah, this could happen like way more often, because if you actually listen to these athletes, they have so much to say, they have so much value, they have so many opinions that are really worth hearing. And so I wish there were more media entities, especially, right, that could be thinking about this differently, and yet they're not, right? And so money's left on the table. And for me, as someone interested in media, there's really great content that we leave on the floor when we don't think about it and include them. Like sometimes we watch stuff, we're like, who was in this room writing this, right? When there are really great ideas. And so both people in front of and behind a camera, I think we have to think about these ideas differently, and not just current athletes, but when athletes retire, there's all this value and worth and embodied knowledge that they bring to the table. So I also really want to see more athletes that are hired, that come from great institutions, great colleges, great potential, and yet in many ways are seen as just an athlete. And I think there's something about that that I would really like to see changed as well.
I mean, it's really hard to follow such a beautiful answer, but it's such a, honestly, renowned thinker and writer. I was going to say probably 3 quick points. I think that that Courtney and Anna and Amira point out something really important to think about, and particularly when we think about NIL and we think about young Black women athletes, and the way in which the chasm between the Angel Reeses and the person you don't know, so that I don't even have a name to put on the other part of this, is extreme. And it's also made even more extreme by the current media landscape that we are in. And not just, I mean, the sporting landscape, is that what we are asking people to be nowadays is influencers, which is like, there's an entire market for that. It's saturated. So that you do not enjoy actually going on to TikTok or making one, because you're just being sold something you don't know. You just like, click the ad. I thought I was here for the dancing. So there's an element that that Black women athletes are within the same vexed moment that Black women in general are, which is, again, style trendsetters, all of these things. And a lot of this work then is happening in other places. And I actually want to think about that, because when you think about the second point, there's a lot of content left on the floor. I don't necessarily believe that necessarily is a bad thing. I think the money left on the floor is a bad business move. Yes. And I think for the overall change of our public imagination and for issues of equity and representation, totally, full stop, yes. But I think that there's something also really interesting that's happening in these offline spaces, because if there's a group of people who are not even making it into those marketing deals, therefore not wasting time on those things, or also creating their own collective forms of community that are happening in these smaller spaces. You know, if there are 6 spots on the shop, you know, put on by Uninterrupted, you know, at best you're going to get 2. Right. And so thinking about the ways in which some of this work is happening on the court, off the court, and in all these other spaces, it really, again, puts the focus on the ways in which Black women have been taking care of Black women. As athletes, as community, as thinking, what are the long-term things? Get the degree. And the roles of how many Black women actually get their degree, or stay through an entire 4-year program or 5-year program, or come out also with the additional masters. And so there's something also to be said about the ways in which the same racist market logics that exist in all industries still circulate within sporting industries, and the same kind of racist logic that says Black women are not desirable subjects or consumers. That obviously works as a larger detriment to our entire social structure, but also creates these interesting social enclaves that allow for Black women to do really important work. And I think that's why the model of the WNBA, which has this interesting, as you point out, presence, and also obscured closed doorsness that we can see. Well, how are they able to operate like this? How are they to be so individualist but able to operate as one? And I think because they are sort of representing that sort of, this is happening in other places and this is happening on a bigger scale. And so therefore we can advocate for each other. We can center Black people. We can center Black lives. We can center all of these things. We can think about women's health and reproductive rights. We can think about the ways in which if you don't fit a particular aesthetic or then you won't have a market, because those same market logics that make it that if you are blonde and you are conventionally European pretty, what do you call it? You just got to get on the team. You can be the mascot. You can. That's not even true. you can just go to the game. And there's a good chance you can outsell someone who's not at a Division I or Division II or, at Iowa, like, producing work. And I think also that's the scale level difference that we're talking about. Right now, we're talking about high performance and high market programs. We're not necessarily talking about, someone at a D3 school. And so that's why I say there's all these other kinds of communities around sport and about the issues that Black women face, which is also being like hyperly not seen because you're not Angel and you're not at LSU and you're not at USC and you're not at Oregon and you're not at Iowa or my alma mater, UCLA. You're at the Dartmouth and, that's my other alma mater. So shout out to y'all. Y'all really doing it, on the sides. But jump in, Amira.
No, this is great. As we wind down, I just want to put two more questions on the table. So one of the things that you all raised in this last part, especially talking about agents and Sam's, really salient point about how Black women have infrastructurally figured out ways to take care of other Black women. I think oftentimes when we talk about Black women in sports, we center on the athletes ad nauseum, which is understood and why we do it, but also they're not operating in a landscape by themselves. And one of the things that we've seen, the same way that we've had this conversation for football, and we want to say, wow, those sidelines, those front offices absolutely are in stark contrast to the people on the field. We're having those same conversation in women's sports, particularly basketball. It has just been in the last 5 years or so where we've seen the huge disparity in women's basketball start to shift in terms of coaches. But we still see where institutionally Black women get stuck. So right here at Vanderbilt, right, we have Candace Lee, which is great as a barrier breaker and trailblazer. Again, the last 6 years have been wonderful as we've seen Black women move into the Power Five at the head of it. But we also see that the logics of keeping Black women at like the SWA positions or in caretaking positions or away from big football programs or away from big donors that they have to interface with has made a huge disparity in terms of administrative positions that Black women hold. And I think historically, one of the things that if you're unfamiliar with the unintended consequences of Title IX, so when Title IX were passed, women, particularly Black women, held 95% of the coaching positions of women's collegiate sport, had administrative positions to the tune of 96%. That number is now 15%. Coaches were about like 42, right? So we're seeing it, even as doors have opened for athletes, the doors have closed for other positions in the sporting landscape, which is why the conversation has to be paired with the way people are making inroads in these other areas as well. Over the last 2 years, I've been working on a series about Black women in gymnastics from the 80s till today. And while that series talked a lot with gymnasts and how they've navigated the sport, it also paid attention to organizations like Brown Girls Do Gymnastics, who held meets at HBCUs, eventually leading to the establishment of Fisk's gymnastics team and now Talladega as well. But at these meets, they also brought athletic trainers who are Black women. They brought coaches, they brought judges, because in gymnastics, the judging book is judged to judge a straight line on a foot based on it being a white foot. And so when they saw the underside of a Black foot, they would deduct points, despite the fact that our feet are just 2 colors, right? Like it's just melanin. And so having people in those positions really matter to changing the game. And it's work, we talked about labor, it's the labor of somebody like Simone Biles creating the World Champion Center, where I met a little girl from Wisconsin who was moving to Houston to train there. And if you watch the Olympics in 2024 in Paris, don't be surprised when that team has no white people on it. Maybe one, Jocelyn, but she's a thick white girl who trains at Simone's gym. That's not a coincidence. But these things are the institutional responses that we're seeing in places, in inroads that are, I think you can see this in organizations, athletes, and like people who are putting new imaginations of sporting landscapes forward and also opening doors to traditionally closed off spaces within sports, I think is a remarkable thing. So let me put my other question on the table. You can answer either one of them as we close out. The other thing that you touched on that I want to talk about is how Black women athletes in their kind of symbolic role Anna gave this wonderful answer 2 years ago about how she's a Black woman athlete, she's Olympian, but she's a Black woman, right? And what she's dealing with labor, and what she's dealing with symbol, what she's dealing with mental health is what Black women are dealing with writ large. And I think one of the areas that we really see this is around Black women's maternal health, right? And I think that Black women athletes have really help advanced awareness about this crisis through sharing their stories, Allison Felix, Serena Williams, for talking about, it doesn't matter your class, your physical status, your degree level, the maternal mortality rate is three to four times the national average. And I think that I'm thinking about this because we just went through a summer of the Women's World Cup where we were celebrating athlete moms, right? It became a different rhetorical device and symbolic thing. And I was like, it's very hard to square this when Roe is overturned. It's very hard to square this when Tori died in childbirth. It's very hard to square this when Dearica is getting, fired for being pregnant. And so at the same time that we're celebrating athletes' moms as a way of measuring the steps of progress of women in sports, what good does these progressive policies do for Black women if they won't survive childbirth, right? If they won't survive walking in this world as a Black woman. So I think that that's one issue in which both we see the pedestal that athletes being on, helping to shine light on this issue, but also a way where we understand that the lived experience of being a Black woman globally is intersecting with this, larger issue in and out of sports. And so I'm wondering whether it's that or another area in which you see that as we close out. How are Black women shifting narratives, moving the conversation forward, or making inroads in places that we might want to shine a light on here in our closing minutes? And anybody who wants to start can start with that.
I'll hop in. I think one of the things that I'll start with, because you started with Title IX and coaching, and I think the 50th anniversary of Title IX, the original Title IX, as we know, Title IX is a constant battle. It's weaponized in particular ways, as you mentioned, both NIL, it's weaponized against trans athletes. I think that Title IX is one of the most fascinating legislative moments in this country's history because it is so slippery. And so I want to speak a little bit to coaching because I think Anna also started with talking about an organization that is focused on Black athletes, but also thinking about these other structures of support, like therapists, like trainers, who are these other folks that interface that can understand and are really centering those kinds of understandings. The judging thing I think is super, super interesting as well. Like all these other roles that really shape the landscape of what we call within our space, the sports media complex, right? So all these intersecting kind of industries and understandings. And so I want to start with coaching because from my landscape, I think about media the most. And I think about athlete labor second in terms of the things that really kind of capture my research interest. And so I'm thinking about this moment that I don't think is really talked about as much now because of everything that happened with the championship game and the fallout over how people judged Angel Reese, right, for the You Can't See Me. But before that, in the first set of Final Four games, Dawn Staley took the podium after South Carolina lost, and she called out a member of the media who had been out running their little mouth in the Dallas streets and calling her players thugs and monkeys. And she took time and she said, I said I was going to say this whether my team won or lost. And one of the things I like is that she says, like, you're saying this and you are a national beat reporter for this sport. So even when we have these moments, right, where women's basketball can be heralded as this very marketable, very sellable, sellout crowds, history is being made, right? These sellout crowds. And so I think there's this moment where she stops and she says, no, but I see you, right? So we're talking about very racially loaded language. You're calling her players thugs and monkeys aloud where other people can hear you. And she said, I have friends in the media too, right? So this understanding of both like how she's seen how her players, she's very protective of her players. Dawn Staley is the kind of coach, like, I just wish she could coach my life, like currently. And so there's this way that she's both protecting her players. There's a legacy. I see C. Vivian Stringer and Don Imus in this larger legacy of Black women head coaches protecting their players when these very racialized logics are kind of, and this language is leveraged towards them. So why these positions are so important and why those things are happening. And even in this new generation, for folks that follow women's basketball, Sydney Carter of my hometown, DeSoto, as an assistant coach that also was seen as too sexy, right? So this idea of we're either not sexy enough, but her being seen as a distraction on the sidelines as an assistant coach, right, is also something that's like about discouraging the future of this sport moving forward. And so, you know, I think part of it is I love the ways that I saw Black women coming to her defense online, much like Dawn Staley. If you look at the comments underneath that press conference, people see what it is and see what she's doing, and it's really intentional. So I'm really interested in seeing the ways that we can have more media members that are representative of the sports that they cover. I think it's really important because we still are dealing with these kinds of logics, even a sport that is majority Black, like women's basketball at the collegiate level and the professional level in this country. And then finally, you talked about opportunity. So I guess I'll end on a high note and just think about Athletes Unlimited, which you kind of mentioned. We went to a game the second season of the basketball season in Dallas as well. And Texas has the most book bans going out of this country, my home state. So I'll own that. But one of the things I loved is they did a bookshop collaboration, and all these books that are on banned lists in various places happen to be the books that athletes chose, right? So you win this thing, you get this book, right? So Push Out was one of the books. There were a couple of children's books that were catered towards Black kids, kids of color in general, queer kids. And so the idea of taking these books that are on these lists and centering them and talking about them during the game was something I thought was just so important. So I want to think about these openings, these sponsorships, these potentials of being a little subversive, right? I think Athletes Unlimited does a great job with their media, but also their politic is really upfront in ways that are important. They have pronouns with their rosters. They have causes that they all individually fight for. And so I want to think about what these openings might do in shifting the general kind of sporting landscape, and think about what the growth of these newer leagues can allow us to think about differently within sport.
That's such a great answer. And I'll add a short piece, which is, I think about the symbolic, I think about right now, I just asked myself, so who's the biggest women athlete like right now in our moment? And I was like, okay, if I would have, a couple of years ago, if I didn't get COVID, I would have said obviously Serena, when I would have seen her with Amira. And then, it's like, okay, maybe, Coco, Simone, and it's always, there's something that's actually resonating from the previous panel when I jumped on, resonating in a way that irks me though. And it's probably because it was, I think it was the thing that, winning can cover some sins. And I think that's a very masculinist frame to think about that, because Black women's excellence has never provided that cover. In fact, it's only actually at the apex of the excellence do we see the actual, the true hailstorm of hatred or of racism and sexism that exists. And so to your point about what Anna said about there's still Black women. We're still trying to live out the Combahee River Collective. Until we are free, ain't nobody free. And so it really is that even when we are it's Simone, it's Coco, it's Naomi, these are the other ones I'm trying to remember their names, but unremarkable in a real kind of way. They're still there, and yet still they are subjected to they're subjected to what me, everyday regular Black girl, and that's, I think, also what makes us deeply as Black women attracted to them as fans. Because there's a way in which, unlike other kinds of celebrity that feel untouchable, we are quickly reminded that they are Black women, and then we have to see them navigate the world in those ways, in the same way that we are in a regular kind of day situation. And so their symbolism is so deeply fraught, especially as we think as they go off to the Olympics as totems of America, and yet still, deeply disregarded, or siloed or put away in a beautiful fourth panel that, again, could have been reverberated over the entire cross of the thing. And my last point, as a person who often gets asked to talk about sports documentaries, or the person who writes about sports documentaries, it when you see it, because every sports documentary, the majority of which are about men, rarely ever bring Black women to commentate. And so when I was watching, the one on Bill Russell, I think they had maybe Candace Parks, one woman, as if the history of the WNBA and the NBA are not intertwined. And also that the history and the legacy of Bill Russell would not have also impacted women. And so there's just the deep and entrenched ways that Black women are treated, and Black women athletes are treated like Black women, which is not considered to neither be arbitrators of excellence and knowledge about excellence, but also, yeah, just forgotten. So, but that's
And
my
I'll
final
give you
thought.
the last word, and perhaps we can end kind of full circle where we started. You're heading off to the Olympics and training. I'm fingers crossed, I'm manifesting it for you.
Thank you.
But also you're running great. So
That's in my career.
listen, exactly. I'm wondering now, as you are, approaching being a upper vet now in the sport, and you're thinking about this era of listening and learning and all this stuff, what are you thinking about what you need and what you want? And how other people can support you and other Black women in sports as you head off, as Sam said, as these like testaments to America, with the weight of that on your shoulders, but also, all of our hands at your back.
Yeah, I think to answer your question from before, and then I'll come back to that, I think a lot of what we're talking about here is what we need. I think, Sam, earlier you were talking about how there's a lack of understanding of history. We pretend that every Black woman who emerges in sports is the one, exists by herself. There is no one before her. Who knows if there'll be anyone after her? And I think the work that you all do as scholars, as people in media, as commentators, is that you bridge the gap and you make the connections. And so you show people like me who are in it right now, there were your foremothers before you, and they had foremothers. And it kind of grounds you in time in a different way. Because I think so much of being an athlete is being very, very present-minded to the point that you're almost afraid of the future. You're hyper aware that at some point, the legs are not going to move the way they move right now. You're very aware that for an Olympic sport like track and field, this is the most lucrative year going into an Olympic year. So you're always racing against the clock. And it's always this fear of, if I don't seize this moment right now, there will not be another moment for me. And I think what is always so exciting and inspiring and empowering about conversations like this are that I get to see there are so many avenues. And there were people before me who, when they had their shining moment, continued to live a rich life after that. And I think more than anything, what we need to continue to see Black women in sports across the sports media ecosystem, whether that's a coach like Dawn, and I had a coach like Dawn in college, Coach Carol Smith Gilbert, who said to me very early on, I will be in your life for the rest of your life. And when I was 19, I was like, girl, I got a mom, like, leave me alone. But now at 26, she's not my coach anymore, but she is a mentor. She is a friend. She is someone I trust so much. And she had a mentor, Coach Bev, who she speaks to. And so now I'm part of that lineage. And ideally, there will be people who are behind me who are part of my lineage, who are part of Carol's lineage, who are part of Bev's lineage. And we're all in this massive tree, constantly trying to better things for the person coming after us. And so I think what we need is a continuation of moments like this, where we're connecting the dots, we're describing the legacy, we're defining the legacy, and then we're saying, where are the gaps? Coach Carol is one of how many Black women who's a head coach of a combined men's and women's track and field program? There aren't that many women who are head coaches of men's and women's track and field, period. I think there's like maybe 6 right now. And I think of the 6, 3 are Black. So there's a gap right there. And I get to watch Carol as she continues to bring on young Black women who are her assistant coaches and continue to build that tree. And so it's just, we're doing that directly in the sport. We're doing that with coaching and with athletes and the next generation of athletes. And it's the same thing in media. We get to see people retire from the NBA and the NFL, and then they're on SportsCenter and they have these lucrative jobs and they're getting to reframe their own legacy and continuing to be relevant. How many Black women do we see get to do that with their career? We're starting to get there. We've got Sonia who does track coverage now, but she's one of how many? So it opens up the window of possibility past this specific moment in time this is my one moment in sports. When you get to see people who are 40, who've had kids, who talk about, this is what I dealt with trying to have a family. This is the battle I had to fight to even survive childbirth. And then on top of that, you have a career, you're still in sports, you're still relevant. That is what opens a door. And that's what honestly takes the pressure off of me. Is like, okay, this is a big moment. This is a big year. There's no denying it. But every year of my life is going to be a big year. And this is not the only one. There's a window, a massive amount of possibilities available for me. I just need people to help me see it. And this isn't just a, oh, if you see it, you can be it kind of moment. Because no, we need to give Black women jobs. We need to give them mics. We need to give them resources so that they continue to be able to be seen, not just in a one-off moment at the end of a virtual panel, all siloed together. We need to be sprinkled throughout and part of it in an enduring way. And so I would just say, what Black women athletes are selling, buy it. What Black women are up for jobs as far as coaching or in the media, support them. Read their work, watch their documentaries, because it creates a lineage and a history that is accessible in a way that it hasn't been in a long time. And so I'm going to stop rambling now. But I so appreciate all of y'all for every time I see you all, it just really fills me up and makes me feel warm. And it's very inspiring and exciting. And I'm so appreciative of the opportunity to be a part of conversations like this.
Well, we love it when you're in conversation with us. On behalf of myself, Sam, Courtney, and Anna, thank you so much for sticking around for our panel. And I will turn it back over to Andrew to close out the event.
Thank you so much, Amira, and Courtney, Samantha, Anna. It was an amazing panel. Samantha, I think you mentioned at the beginning that you were hoping it would be the closer of all closers, and certainly delivered on that. It was a save opportunity, and you got the save without a doubt. That was incredible. We had a great day, starting with Dr. Sheppard and Dr. Lee kicking things off all the way through all three panels. I think this was as amazing as we could have possibly hoped for, and more so. Amira, you mentioned the Fisk gymnastics team. I'm really excited that their home meet in Nashville this year will take place at Vanderbilt on MLK Day in Memorial Gym, which is the gymnasium where Perry Wallace made history as the first Black basketball player in the SEC. So this whole day kind of coming full circle. MLK spoke there in 1967 when Perry was playing here at Vanderbilt. Courtney, I was excited when you mentioned the books that Athletes United and the subversive nature of the books for kids, that they're providing as somebody that writes books about sports and social justice for young people. That was really exciting to hear. And all of Anna's comments I know would resonate so strongly with our student athletes here at Vanderbilt, and would love to have a chance to invite her to Nashville to speak directly to them at some point. For those of you who have asked questions on the chat about whether today's panels will be have been recorded and would be made available, yes, this is being recorded. We will share a link with all of the attendees and with all of the panelists. Also, we'll post it on YouTube and through our Vanderbilt Sports and Society Twitter account. If you're not following us on Twitter, it's at Sports Society VU. If you'd like to receive our weekly e-newsletter, which is a roundup of articles relating to sports and society each Friday morning, you can DM us at that Twitter account or email me at andrew.j.marinus@vanderbilt.edu. If you want to follow the work of the James Lawson Institute, that's vanderbilt.edu/James Lawson Institute. If anyone has thoughts about, we want to do this again next year. So if you have thoughts about themes you'd like to see discussed, or panelists who are doing great work and deserve a chance for visibility, and we may even do this in person next year, hoping to do that. So again, thank you to all of our moderators and to our panelists, and for everyone for tuning in today, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.